Hello there, you nuggets of excellence. Today, once and for all, I'm going to prove to you that your road bike is overgeared. I'm not going to yell at you, I'm not going to beg you, I'm not even going to use some long-winded sophistry to make my point. I'm going to use science. And before I go on, let me start by saying that you are listening to an old, fat and untrained fellow whose idea of a road bike is a 15 kg clunker with front suspension. You know you can trust me. But before we go into the gory details, let us answer one very vital question. What makes you so slow? And I mean, what makes you slow apart from 20 years of fixing your problems with chocolate? Well, what makes you slow is a force called drag, and on just about every bicycle out there, there are three sources of it. In simplest terms, drag is a force that works against you. The first kind of it on a bicycle is the mechanical drag, which is a drag of tires over the tarmac, bearings over bearings, and chains over cogs, and just about everything that slides over anything else mechanical in the bicycle is a source of this one. The second one is aerodynamic drag, which is caused by the pressure of air as you ride through it. The third one is a gravitational drag, which is the planet below you has a gravity field, and you are not weightless, so as you ride up or down, on an uphill or downhill, you are either working for or against gravity. If you are working for gravity, you are getting pulled by this particular drag, and if you are working against, you are going up. You have a source of drag caused by the planet below you. I'm not going to bore you with the full physical description of how a drag impacts a bicycle, because that would warrant another video. However, there is a calculator out there, something like Kreuzter Speed Calculator. I would have put a link in the description if I haven't forgotten already. However, I have used this calculator before. It's very accurate or very predictive. However, it has a very fatal flaw. You can't script it. So for the sake of this video, I have wrote my own version of it. And the link to the GitHub repository is in the description. If I haven't put it there, bug me for it so you can cross-check my work. Point being, with using this description, we are going to be modeling some stuff. So, what we are going to model is a UCI legal road bike with a 75 kg mammal on top, 200 watts of sheer middle-aged crisis power at the crank, which can be sustained for an hour. He's riding 300 meters above sea level at 25 degrees Celsius and 25% humidity. It's quite warm, really. He's holding the bars on tops. So how much power he has to produce in order to ride at a range of speeds from 5 to 55 kilometers per hour? Well, about this much. What you see before you is a function that shows you how speed and power correlate when drag is involved. On the horizontal axis we have speed, on the vertical axis we have power. From this plot you can read that if our mammal is producing 200 watts, he's going to achieve approximately 32-ish kilometers per hour. If he's going to push his 5-minute threshold, he's going to produce approximately 250 watts and is going to achieve a speed of approximately 35 kilometers per hour. In order to make it even more interesting, I have divided each category of power required to overcome drag in its own category. On the very top is the plot of power required to overcome the total drag, then lower is the aerodynamic drag, then at the bottom of the plot is the mechanical drag, and the very bottom is nothing because we're riding on the level ground, so gravitational drag is 0. And from this plot you can judge that aerodynamic drag at higher speeds is brutal. However, on the very top of the plot you see the jagged line which shows you the cadence multiplied by 10 to make it even more apparent, but it's cadence if our cyclist is using his gears perfectly. And from this jagged line you can see that the 52/11 gear starts to get useful at approximately 45 kilometers per hour and the power output of 450 watts. So, my lovely audience, how often are you really pushing above 450 watts? Because, let's be honest with each other, if your FTP is approximately 200 watts, then your average speeds, provided you live somewhere flattish, are going to hover around 30 kilometers per hour, and everything above that is, technically speaking, sprinting. Moreover, with just 200 watts of FTP, well, a hope to push 52/11 gear is most likely a fantasy, and pushing 52/13 is a futile attempt at anaerobic exercise. unless it's your intervals day. And yes, if you read the chart correctly, you will note that going from 15 cog to 11 cog requires you to triple the amount of power you produce. But right, not everyone lives in the Netherlands, and those high gears are pretty much necessary to ride downhill, right? Well, let's try to model how steep a downhill needs to be in order to achieve a speed of 50 km per hour with just 200 watts of input power. The answer is on the screen right now. Yes, you are reading correctly. In order to achieve a speed of 50 km per hour with just 200 watts of input power, you need to find a hill with an average gradient of negative 4.5%. Nothing major really, right? That's just like half of Mont Ventoux, so those things must be everywhere. Well, in order to get a sustained negative 4.5% gradient over a distance of just 5 kilometers, you need to drop 225 meters. Such elevation differences don't just happen on accident, they happen if you live in proper mountains. And the thing with proper mountains is that they are very difficult to develop, thus majority of human settlements happen somewhere else. Or they happen in the valleys of those mountains where the elevation differences aren't so major. But what if you live in the actual mountains or you are on a road trip somewhere? The problem is that roads weren't really developed for aspiring cyclists, but for cars, and more specifically for trucks and other deliveries, and thus majority of gradients are kept at a fairly shallow value. And when we find the one that's actually interesting for us, we give it a name. And when we find one, well, there's another problem. You see, it's not going to be a 5 kilometer stretch of negative 4.5%, it's going to be a winding, hairpinny kind of a road that goes along a mountain face to keep the gradient fairly consistent, because hills don't really come at nice, smooth downhills. So once you find such a downhill, you're actually going to be spending majority of your time either accelerating out of a hairpin or braking before one. But what if you found the mythical negative 4.5% gradient over 5 kilometers of asphalt for you to enjoy at a speed of 50 kilometers per hour. You're going to be enjoying it for approximately 6 minutes. And then you'll have to climb for an hour in order to repeat the experience, because the 10-to-1 rule of mountain riding is still in effect. And in short, it also means that you're not going to be enjoying your very high gears on downhills as long as you envision. And at this point I have something to confess. I lied to you, because I'm a liar. I didn't lie to you about the speed you are going to achieve because the model I presented predicts that with sensible accuracy. I lied to you by omission because I didn't tell you how long it's going to take for you to achieve this speed, because I have conveniently forgot about kinetic energy. I'm going to make a wild assumption that you're not made of photons, and neither you're riding a bike made of them, therefore you have mass. And as you accelerate, as you gain speed, you are gaining energy that's associated with that mass, because you are gaining kinetic energy. It's the energy of mass, well, moving. The faster you go, the more kinetic energy you have. And this energy obviously can't come from nowhere. It comes from, well, the chocolate you ate. It works more or less like this. As your body converts chocolate into something useful, you are pushing that something useful through your TI spindled overpriced pedals into your bike. At that point, it gets converted into two things. One is overcoming the drag, which allows you to go forward. And two, if there's some energy remaining, it's going to get converted into kinetic energy of you, your bike, and everything you carry. And in order to compensate that increased energy, you're going to accelerate. Of course, the faster and faster you are going, the more and more of drag you are experiencing, therefore more and more of the energy you are pushing into your bike gets used into fighting the drag, therefore less and less energy gets used to accelerate you. This means that the faster you're going, provided the energy input is constant, the faster you're going, the slower you're going to accelerate. The net result is, as you see on the screen. With our 200 watts of power, we are going to achieve the velocity of approximately 32 kilometers per hour in about 800 seconds, which isn't really realistic. However, we are going to be 99% there in just 47 seconds. Remember when I told you about this accelerating and braking into the hairpins if you're going downhill? This is what I meant. At this point it should become clear that if you really want to achieve this theoretical maximum speed for a given power input and road conditions, what you need to do is to exceed your FTP, sprint to a higher speed, and then allow the drag to creep you back into a new equilibrium. If you're not going to do this, then the ever-changing road conditions are always going to stop you from achieving that speed, because you're only slowly creeping towards this. And of course, that's going to diminish the amount of opportunities you have to use the higher gears. And of course, the faster you go, the higher is the magnitude of drag, which further reduces the opportunities to use those high gears. And at this point, science ends and advocacy begins. And I'm going to start by, well, wearing some sort of flame repellent, because, you see, I am perfectly aware that for majority of you, bicycles are not meant to make money. You actually could defend the notion that bicycles are meant to lose money. And since they are a part of a hobby, not everyone is keen on trying to keep them into an industrial standard of efficiency. And if that's the case, well, I guess you should be happy with your recent purchase. The second thing is, of course, that regardless of everything, I'm sure that there's going to be that one opportunity to use that 53x11 gear, even if it's just going to be for 3 seconds, once per 3 weeks on that 3-hour ride you're doing with your buddies. Point being isn't that this gear is absolutely useless. My point is that what sort of magnitude of usage you're going to get out of it, and what have you lost, and what sort of trade-offs were being done to give you this opportunity. And look at it this way. In order to get to that 45 km per hour, you need to produce 500-ish watts of power. If your FTP is just 200 watts, it means that you need to summon 300 extra. How to get it? Well, you have to either be assisted by a downhill or be assisted by a semi-trailer. Both of these appear to be, well, having their own issues and having a rather limited availability. Without getting boosted by those two, and without going full length, I guess, the problem is that your 1132 11-speed cassette actually degenerates into 1332 9-speed cassette, and your 1128 9-speed degenerates into 1328 7-speed. Anyhow, those 2 extra clicks are actually quite expensive, and, well, if I were in the business of paying that extra, I would actually want something that's useful for me as an average cyclist and not for a pro. Point being that I would prefer to get 2 extra cogs in the range of 13 to 20, where I spend most of my time, instead of getting 2 extra halo gears. But alas, we're not there. So why are we where we are? The answer for this question is obviously the radio. The size of the biggest chainring in a road bike in the neighborhood of 52 or 53 teeth is something that emerged in the 60s and 70s of the previous century. During those times, your average pro rider would ride 50 something at the front as the biggest one, 40 something at the front as the smaller one, and it would be coupled to a 5 or 6 speed freewheel with a 13 tooth as the smallest cog. Civilian models of bicycles would be starting at 14 or even 15 because, well, normal people weren't really seen as someone who needs such a ludicrously high gear. And, well, when you have just 5 gears to add to your freewheel, then you have to make some sort of a sacrifice. 12 tooth wasn't really a thing until the late 80s, when free hubs became popular and it was possible to mount them. Before then they were really just a very niche specialty item. Now, 11 tooth is something that wasn't really common on road bikes, well, until the late 90s, because, well, it was something that mountain bikes do to compensate for their smaller chainrings. Now, it was grandfathered in or added in when 9-speed became a thing in the late 90s, so Dura Ace 7700 or something like that. And during the times of Eddie, or even Miguel, the inter-team communication would be very basic, close to non-existent, because, well, you can achieve just so much with shouting. So, during those times, the race leader or the team leader would have much more freedom to chase his opponents, to bait them into chasing him, to get more aggressive and to get more involved in the race. So, the races would be much more fun to watch, it would be much more in the spirit of combat between all the people participating. However, by the end of the race, everyone's energy levels would be much more depleted than they are now. However, as the technology progressed, the intra-team communication became much more closer and much more real-time. In essence, currently, a team director is able to order his riders around during the race, watching the situation unfold, and tell them to chase someone, to block someone, to protect their team leader and whatnot. Essentially, what you're watching now is a very boring, real-time, high-effort chess game, and you're not going to be watching any clashing personalities and whatnot in the current situation. However, that's not the point here. This situation led to this emergence of a strategy that's being utilized by every pro team these days, which is essentially protect the team leader from exhausting himself, because you want to drag him to the end of the race so he can sprint to the finish during those epic 2000 watt efforts. And this is the reason why that 11-tooth cock exists. It is to unlock the possibility to sprint to the finish line when the other guy also has that cock, and you are both able to push the watts to do this. And because of the team communications, you are fresher than you would be, I don't know, 50 years ago, and because of improved training, you are able to push those watts. If you're not one of those people, then you are either facilitating or are being caught in this cargo cult of buying what the pros ride. Essentially, if we were to speak in the terms used by our friends from the USA, you are either a Fred or you are being threaded. However, this problem isn't really limited to road bikes, because currently, as freewheels are being pushed out of the markets and free hubs are replacing them, what was 14 as the biggest cog is now, as the smallest cog, is now an 11. However, the front chainrings aren't really changing that much, so your average trekking bike here in Europe is going to be geared with 48 by 11 as the highest gear. So you have a bike that is essentially being meant to be ridden with luggage, being geared higher than what Eddy Merckx would be winning Tour de France with, which is pretty ridiculous now. Mountain bikers thankfully learned pretty quickly that big chainrings get smashed on rocks pretty hard, and they got rid of them pretty quickly. However, gravel bikes are now being spec'd with 46 or 48 as the biggest chainring, and still an 11 or even 10 at the back. That's ridiculous. That's not going to be used by average humans ever, because you need a ridiculous amount of effort or ridiculous amount of training to be able to spin that gear. And let's be honest here, I understand that the latest and greatest carbon road bike that allows the user to identify with the favorite pro cyclist, well, comes spec the way it does because people buy team kit and getting useless gearing comes with the territory, kind of. The problem is that bicycles sold to average people are being sold with features those people will be never able to realistically utilize, or even worse, they are going to overcomplicate the bike to a level that's not going to make it very accessible to new riders. The issue we're having here is a peculiar kind of hero worship, because as you're making research to buy something for a bicycle, let's be topical, you are looking at what people, knowing what they're doing, are doing. So that would be the pros and the general cycling culture in our case. Point being that you are taking notes and you desire what the pros ride, or what the cycling culture told you that the pros ride, in essence. Point being, this is what you desire, and when the manufacturer is making their market research, they are obviously asking the very important question: what does the consumer want? And the consumer wants X. So we are offering X. However, we are also in this uncomfortable position that we want the consumer to see that we are offering X, so we are taking the X and giving it to the pros. In my opinion, and as you already established, my opinion is literally the law of the universe, because I am talking head of the internet. In my opinion, your average everyday cyclist, and obviously disclaimer, might not be you. Disclaimer, you might be a pro. Disclaimer, you might be genetically gifted. Disclaimer, you might be riding an e-bike. Disclaimer, 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 disclaimer. Your average everyday cyclist, if we bring it back to the current trends of using 11 to 32 cassette, would be much better set with a 13 to 32, but with 2 extra cogs on 11 speed. 2 extra cogs in between, so you would gain a 16 and 18 tooth cog. That would be, you would get much higher utilization of your cogs, and you would get much more gears in the usable working range of your cassette. Now, for women, for seniors, for people we can estimate a lower FTP ceiling, in a way, 14 to 36 would be even more useful. However, we're not getting there. And a little anecdote. One of the most popular videos in this channel is a video where I showed how I managed to put an 1142 cassette on a road bike. And in a way you can try to guess what sort of a market desire or sort of market need would make this particular video so popular, because that's just 1.5 minute video of me showing how I managed to put it together. I didn't even hope that's going to make some sort of anything. Well, as I wrote the script, this is the point where I wrote the finish, because I noticed that the script grew to over 16 kilobytes, and that would be quite excessive. And obviously all three of you who are now listening to this, thank you very much for your undivided attention, and obviously I hope to see you in the next video, and share, like, subscribe.